And basics of the soil, that includes the definition and composition, and also includes the properties of the soil, chemical, physical, biological properties of the soil. I would be elaborating more on the soil texture, which can be done at our convenience, and that would help to save the cost associated with it. And then we'll do a couple of slides on the soil sampling, because most of the analysis is based upon soil sampling, how we collect the representative sample that definitely will dictate the analysis section. After the basics, we'll cover the soil health definition, and then the principles. We'll do the polling, quick polling, and then we'll follow up with the questions and the answer sessions at the end. Again, so feel free to add your questions in the chat box, and those would be answered as we after the polling part. So what is soil? It's an unconsolidated material occurring as a mixture of minerals, organic material, and then the humus. Organic material as a humus and the living organisms on the immediate surface of the earth that serves as a medium for the plant growth. It is also known as the skin of the earth. So this is soil. And then we have to know the difference between the soil and the dirt. I think it's very important to know the dirt is a soil out of place, just like a plant out of place is a weed. So the soil which is out of place, not in the fields, not in the gardens, not in the pots, it's out of place is known as a dirt, and the plants out of place is known as a weed. The dirt gets on our clothes, or it gets under our fingernails. The dirt can be tracked by shoes on our clothes, as shown in these pictures. But the important thing to remember is the dirt is a dead material. It lost the characteristics that give its ability to support the life. So dirt is a dead material again, and the soil is a living and life-giving substance. So now we know that soil is a living and life-giving substance. It's most important, valuable resource on the earth, as everything that lives on the land depends upon the soil. It's a medium for the plant growth. It provides a habitat. It provides a habitat for the animals that live in the soil. It also assists with detoxifying the pollutants, and also helps with the gas. For instance, the soil helps with the carbon sequestration and also store the carbon. So it helps in reducing the carbon emissions to the atmosphere. It also helps with the cycling and recycling of the nutrients and the organic waste. So from all, we can say that it helps us to produce the food, feed, fiber, biofuels, and medicines, the daily needs we have on the land. It is also used to build the materials or all the buildings. So the material is to use to build the houses is all the soil. So as we know that it is the important natural resource, and everything that lives on the land depends upon the soil. At the same time, if this natural resource is not managed properly, it can be eroded or degraded. For instance, the land use, disturbance, and the common soil management practices such as tillage, over application of nutrients, pesticides, they may alter the soil properties and subsequently impact the soil health. Another example is the tillage. For instance, the tillage, it deteriorates the soil structure, reduces to the reduction in the aggregates, promotes the organic matter mineralization, thus leading to significant degradation of soil health of the cropland soil. The degradation from these common management practices is typically demonstrated as reduction in the organic matter, accelerated erosion, as you can see, and this is one of the pictures on the extreme right. This is from the 1930s in the Great Plains regions, when the severe drought hits the Great Plains, resulted in erosion and loss of the topsoil because of the existing farming practices at that time. So the drought dried the topsoil and turned to dust and blew away. The persistent dry weather caused crops to fail, leaving the tilled fields exposed to wind erosion, thus leading to the Great Dust Bowl. In addition, the soil can also be eroded by water wherever the ground is not covered by the plants, in addition to the wind erosion. The degradation, the other sections of the degradation that we can see out in the fields is the compaction. The soils are highly compacted with the following the tillage practices and movement of the heavy equipments on the soil. And it also leads to the decreased aggregation and loss of biodiversity, which is below the ground and also above the ground if we keep the land open without any crops on the top. Subsequently, this will lead to the reduce in the agriculture productivity. Therefore, it is very important to keep our soils healthy and productive to meet the needs as the world population and the food production demands rise. We can keep our soils healthy by properly managing our soils to enhance the agriculture productivity. And a good producer always recognizes that the successful production is dependent upon the soil. So now we know how important the soil is, and it is how important the soil is. It is important to know at the same time how the soils are formed. So the soil forms layers or the horizons in response to the 5 soil forming factors. The whole soil from the surface to the lowest depths develop naturally as a result of these 5 soil forming factors. These are climate, and soils vary depending upon the climate. Temperature and moisture amounts cause the different patterns of weathering and leaching. The organisms, which involves plants, animals, microorganisms, humans, affect the soil formation. Animals and microorganisms, they mix the soils and form the burrows and pores. Plant roots also open the channels in the soils. The another factor is the landscape topography. The slope affects the moisture and the temperature of the soil. Steep soils may be eroded and lose their topsoil as they form. Thus, they may be thinner than the more nearly level soils that receive deposits from the area's upslope. And the deeper and the darker soils may be expected to be found on the bottom piece of the land due to the erosion or the deposit from the upper slope. The another factor is the parent material, and few soils weather directly from the underlying rocks. Some soils forms in materials that have moved in from elsewhere. Materials may have moved many miles or only a few feet. So parent material is another important factor leading to the formation of the soils. The time it plays a role for all of these factors to interact with the soil. And it takes about 100 to 1,000 years to form an inch of the soil. So this dictates how important the soil is to maintain and manage. These soil formation processes are continuous. Materials are deposited on their surface and materials are blown or washed away from the surface with the different factors. The additions, removals, and alterations are slow or rapid. They depend upon the climate, landscape position, and biological activity within the soil. So when the mapping is done, the soil scientist always looks for areas with similar soil forming factors to find similar soils. Then the other properties are dictated afterwards. So now we know the soil forming factors and how soils are formed. This is the picture demonstrating the soil horizons. This is the profile, which is a vertical soil section showing the layers of the development. The horizon is a layer of the soil with somewhat similar uniform color, texture, and the structure. As you can see, there are different horizons, which are dictated by their color, texture, and the structure. This is called the topsoil or a horizon. This is the top layer of the soil. It consists of plants and animals residues at various stages of decomposition. The nutrients, bacterial, fungi, and the other life, microbial life are abundant in this horizon. And it is also highest in the nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus, with the maximum biological activity happening at this zone. And roots are also highly concentrated in this part of this section of the profile. Then below this topsoil is a subsoil known as a B. B horizon is a subsoil. It has less organic matter, and also you can view from the difference in the color and the less biological activity as compared to the A horizon. But it offers rich minerals for plants and trees searching for the root systems. There is a concentration of silicate clays, humus, etc., or the development of the structure throughout this horizon as well. The below this B horizon is the C, which is the parent material, and it is formed from the bedrock beneath that after a long weathering process, either by the natural or the chemical methods. This is a spot where the soil layers above will be formed, and it is part weathered rock and part weathered soil. So underneath is the bedrock, which is a solid rock that lies under loose or softer material, and that is known as the outermost layer of the earth crust. And nothing can grow in the bedrock, but it supplies the soil with components which are important to its future. So now we know about the horizons. We saw the vertical section. It is important to know the constituents of the soil, what is major soil components. The composition of the soil varies from one location to another, as I mentioned previously, because it all depends upon the parent material, weathering, climate, landscape. However, an ideal soil on an average, a composition has a bi-volume of 45% minerals, which is composed of sand, silt, and clay, also dictate as a soil texture. Then we got 25% as water, and the nutrients dissolve in this water, and that's what taken up by the plant roots. Then we got 25% section as the air, which contains the gases that helps with the respiration process in the gas exchange. Then we got 5% by volume as the organic matter, which includes the dead and the living organisms. And so this is an ideal soil composition, and it varies from location to location. And the composition of these determine the soil properties that involves the texture, structure, porosity, chemistry, and the color. So this is the basic soil properties that I mentioned I would be covering, but I would be going more into the soil texture later on. The soil properties are essential to the crop production. Crop production potential is greatly influenced by the properties of the soil. Soil serves as a storage reservoir for the nutrients and water needed for the plant growth. Some of the chemical properties are mentioned here is the nutrient content, salinity, toxicities, we can determine from the soil analysis. The pH is another important factor that influences the availability of nutrients to the plant. Some physical properties mentioned here is the soil texture, which I would discuss later. And then the structure is another important, how particle clumps together that dictates the structure. Then the aggregation is another important factor that also helps with the learning about the erosion process. The color is another indicator of the soil, if the soil is well drained or not. And even single color indicates that the soil is well drained, but in contrast, the rusty spots or when you see the gray patches, sometimes a light blue in color, it indicates a poor drainage. Some of the biological properties that can be analyzed or find out from the laboratory analysis is the biomass, biodiversity, microbial activity. It is important to learn that not all the lab will do these analyses. Specialty test labs can provide this by the biological property, soil properties analysis. So some of the basic properties that we tell, so the texture is another factor, but before that I told about the composition, the components, and 45% by volume is the minerals, which is composed of the sand, silt, and clay. The soil separates are specific ranges of particle sizes, and these proportions affect how soils feel to the touch, defining the term texture. The smallest particle are the clay particles and are classified as having a diameter of less than 0.002 millimeters, and they feel sticky upon touching. And the next smallest particle are the silt particles, ranging in size diameter between 0.05 to 0.05 millimeters. And they feel, when we touch the silt, we feel the soft net, silky, or like a flower. And the largest particles are the sand particles, and these are larger than 0.05 millimeter, goes up to the 2 millimeters in size. And we can feel grittiness when we touch the sand. So the proportion of these three particles will dictate the soil texture. And it is very important to know about the soil texture, as other properties are dictated by how the soil texture is. For instance, the soils high in the clay, the movement of the water and air would be very slow, but although there would be a tremendous capacity to absorb the water, but not all the water is available to plants. It is also important to know that the soil texture is not subject to change in the field, even though with the management practices. Okay, let me just admit 4 people are waiting in this room. So let me admit those. So soil texture is it refers to the relative amount of the sand, silt, and clay present in the soil expressed as a percentage. There are 12 soil texture classes, as named here, are defined by the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA. And determining the soil texture is often aided with the use of the soil texture triangle plot. The one side of the triangle represents the sand, the other side represents the clay, and the third side represents percent silt. So for instance, if we have about 40% of the silt and the sand, if we have 40% of the silt and the sand, and then 20% of the clay, then whichever zone it finds, that how it dictates the texture. As I mentioned before, texture is very important as it influences the other physical and chemical properties of the soil. The fine textured soils generally have a higher capacity for water retention, whereas the sandy soils contain larger pores that allows more leaching. And knowing the texture also helps grower or producer to make better decision about the timing of fertilizer application or the irrigation needs. For instance, it is always recommended to do more frequent and smaller amounts of fertilizer application on the lighter textured or the sandy soils, the soils with higher sand amount, to avoid the leaching losses, as compared to applying the fertilizers to heavy or the clay soils. Also, crops growing in the sandy soils, they need more frequent irrigations than growing on the clear heavy soils. So it is important to know the texture, and it influences the other properties. So this is the another image of the soil texture, slide of the soil texture, demonstrating how we can do the soil texture. It's very easy, and it helps to save the cost, because when I see other labs, the commercial labs, they charge about $15 to $25 a sample to do the soil texture analysis. However, this can be done quickly once we have the representative sample of the field that we are interested to learn about it. And it can be, this chart on the right, this can be easily found in the Google when you just type the soil texture by field method NRCS. So this will show all these steps that needs to be done to know the texture of the soil. This will give you the rough estimate on the percentage of the sand, silt, and clay while you follow the steps. And then you go on the triangle that I showed in the previous slide. Then you go on the percentages. Once you find, then you can determine the texture. However, there is another method that the lab, mostly commercial labs, they do, and that's called the hydrometer method. And it gives you the precise texture class. But if someone is interested to find out the texture by itself, it's very easy to do and follow these steps and find out the approximate textural class, and also helps you to save the money at the same time. So that was all about the texture. In addition to the texture, as I mentioned, there are other important properties, and the soils can be tested for the other properties as well. And there are a variety of these reasons and purposes for diagnostic and prognostic applications. Soil testing is very important first step in growing the healthy quality crops in the landscapes. From soil analysis, we can learn what nutrient deficiencies are there, or even if there are any toxicities that help to reduce the fertilizer application. At the same time, it helps us to reduce the cost associated with the additional nutritional application. It also helps to know exactly what is needed to optimize your existing soil, and also helps to select the crop based upon the soil properties. For instance, the soil pH. If the soil pH is lower, for the blueberries, they love to be in the acidic soil. So if you get to know the pH, we can find out which crops would be best produced on that piece of the land. And before we dig into the soil analysis, and before we send the sample to the soil analysis, it is very important to get the representative sample of the soil and send to the lab. So here is a slide about about the soil sampling. It is before planting any crop, it is very important to know the properties and nutrient content of the soil through the soil testing. Soil testing is very important tool for learning about the key characteristics of the soil and its fertility levels. As I mentioned, it's very important to collect the representative sample of the field before analysis. The samples can be collected either in the late fall, just before the soil freezes, or in the early spring, before the growing season. It is recommended to sample around the same time of the year to reduce any seasonal variations in the soil test records. And it is also a good idea to avoid taking the samples within a month of fertilization or addition of any chemicals or manures or organic fertilizers. The most important part during this sampling is you have to use the sampling devices such as probes, shovels that needs to be non-rusty and clean, because that would definitely affect the analysis section. So make sure that these are non-rusty and clean to avoid the contamination. So once we have all these parameters in place, it is important to see the field from where we are going to samples. So soil samples should be collected by dividing the field into similar units or plots based upon the differences in the soil. And these differences can be soil color, soil type, slope, drainage, crop, manure history, etc. And random samples can be collected from each area or a unit in a zigzag pattern as shown here in the picture on the right. For uniform fields, when you see the fields are uniform throughout, collect about 15 to 20 soil cores to equal depths. Again, it's very important that you do the sampling to the same depth to ensure the uniformity. And the probes can help with that. You can mark the probes and see how much deeper you are going to collect the soil samples. Once you collect the soil samples, place them together in a clean plastic bucket or a plastic tray. Again, avoid those rusty stuff that will contaminate the samples. So always use buckets, plastic buckets, or the tray to mix the samples. And it is important to contact the lab or reach the lab where you are planning to send the sample for the analysis. That way you have you can receive the special instructions if they have in following the protocol to collect the sample, mailing, or the information that needs to be submitted. Some labs, they accept the samples without air drying. However, the other labs, they require sample to be air dried. So it's good idea to contact the lab and find out what kind of sample they need for the analysis. The another important part for the analysis is label them properly. Label the bag with the required information such as name, location, area, previous crop, important collection date when you collected the sample, and the depth. And this information will help with the analysis and also help to generate the recommendations for the following crop. The most important step in this, after all these following the previous steps, is keep the records, because this will help producers to recognize changes in fertility over time and adjust the application rates based upon the crop needs to avoid the over application of nutrients and thus reducing the cost, or also and help in reducing the degradation of the environment at the same time with the leaching of the nutrients or erosion, etc. So before you send the sample to the lab, very important to do the follow the protocol to do the soil sampling and have a representative sample so that you can follow the recommendations based upon the analysis. Okay, so that was all about the basics, about basics of the soil, some basic soil properties and texture. I think it helps you to learn how to do the soil texture at your own level and saves the cost associated with it. So let's switch the gears and to learn some about soil health. So what is soil health? It is the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. So the key to the definition is soil health is the continued capacity, which implies that rejuvenation and then sustainability can lead to sustainability. It also includes the soil function, means soil need to provide the basic functions supporting the plant growth, fiber, food production, recycling the nutrients, regulate the water movement, purify and decompose the organic matter, or enhance the water and air quality. And it also encompasses that soil is a living ecosystem, which recognizes the ground beneath as a living ecosystem. So soil health is managing the soil for optimum health in way it ensures that they are sustainable and alive for the future generations. And the healthiness of the soil can be indicated by the soil properties, physical, chemical, and biological, which we discussed previously. And it is a state of the soil being in a sound physical, chemical, and biological condition, having the capability to sustain the growth and development of the land plants to fulfill all the needs. So it's the function, it's a continued capacity, and it's a living ecosystem. And then it needs all the properties to be in the sound state to be termed as a healthiness of the soil. So that was the definition of the soil health. This is the science of the soil health. The scientific system of the soil health, it covers primarily three aspects, which includes the concept, and that has the definition we just discussed, and the interpretation in terms of the processes and the functions. Then the second aspect is the assessment, which includes indicators, soil health indicators, and the methodology used to assess those indicators. Then the last aspect is the management, which involves the principles and the practices. And I will discuss those in the next slides. So earlier we learned about the soil physical, chemical, and biological properties that can be evaluated or tested by the commercial laboratory. And the healthiness of the soil can be indicated by all three properties. And these are some of the soil health indicators that can be used and to find out if the soil is healthy or not. So in the physical, we have the bulk density, which is the indicator of the soil compaction, how much is the soil compacted. And then we have the aggregate stability. It refers to the ability of the soil aggregates to resist the disintegration with the disruptive forces, such as the wind, water, erosion, the tillage, when they are applied, how strong the aggregates are stick together. That way they are not forced to disintegrate or disrupt when we apply the forces such as erosion tillage, water. It can be determined by two methods, that's wet and the dry. And the wet tells how much soil is resisted to the raindrop impact or the water. And then the dry aggregate stability predict the resistance to the wind erosion or the abrasion. The available water capacity is the another soil health indicator that comes under the physical section. And it is the maximum amount of plant available water a soil can provide. It's an indicator of a soil's ability to retain the water and make it sufficiently available for plant use. The another important indicator is the infiltration, water infiltration. It is the downward movement of the water into the soil, how fast and what rate the water is moving through the soil, different layers. The texture is very important indicator and it dictates the other properties as well. Among the chemical soil health indicators, the pH is the important factor and dictates if the soils are acidic, alkaline, or in the nutrient range, and also dictates which crops can perform well in these soils. Another important factor is active carbon, which is most readily degradable by microorganisms, as well as dark carbon, which is bound to the soil minerals. And salinity determine the soil pH, and the nutrients, which involves macro and the micro and these essential NPK nutrients, and these can be get tested in the soil commercial lab analysis. Some of the biological indicators are the earthworm counts. The visible earthworm counts in the soil is very important indicator that soil microbial populations are thriving. The earthworms, they contribute nutrients to the soil and improve the porosity, tilth, and root development. They also contribute to the building of the soil structure and stabilizing the aggregates. So just determine the earthworm counts, it has to see how healthy your soil is. The other factors that can be that can be tested under the biological is the soil enzymes, and it tells us the rate at which the plant residues decompose and how the plant nutrients are available, release the nutrients for the plant availability. The soil respiration can get tested too. And the another important is a mineralizable nitrogen. It is a fraction of the organic nitrogen that's converted to the mineral forms that is easily available to the plants. However, it is dependent upon the temperature, moisture, aeration, and the time. So it has to estimate the available nitrogen in the soil. So these are some of the soil health indicators that can get tested into the lab using the different tests and determine how healthy your soils are. That was part of the assessment and also includes the methodology as it varies from lab to lab, what they are performing and what they are using to find out these indicators. So these are the actions that soil health indicators leads to. The basic is how improving the organic matter, most important, how we can improve the organic matter leads to better aggregate stability, how fast the water is moving through the soil, and increasing the available water capacity, how much water is available to the plants, nutrient cycling, and diversifying and balancing the soil biology that lives beneath the soil, reducing the erosion, and reducing the compaction. So these are the actions that comes under the soil health indicators that we have to follow the practices that I will be talking about in the next slides, and how these practices will lead to these actions. So we have to follow those practices to improve these indicators, and that's very important. It will lead to the healthy soils. So now talking about the soil health principles. So there are 4 soil health principles as this image dictates. The first is a minimizing soil disturbance. It can be either physical, chemical, or biological. So recognizing that we have to bring to the manage level so that it can maximize the productivity. So the another is the maximizing the living cover, how we can maximize the covering of the soil with either the living or the dead plant material. The third is maximizing the biodiversity of the system, which can include above and the below ground. So, and fundamentally, this is introducing the greater temporal and spatial diversity with the plants. And also by adding the grazing animals to the cropping system would be another way of increasing the diversity on the piece of the land. Bringing more livestock grazing into the system, it has to meet this principle. The last and the fourth one is maximizing the time and distribution of living roots in the soil. So in this, the goal is to have the growing plants for as much part of the year as possible. And it is important to note that all these practices are applicable to all the crops. Some operations will benefit from just one soil health practice, while the others may require additional practices to maximize the benefit. So these are applicable to crops or the rangelands. It follows the same soil health principles. It is good to know that it's not a destination. Soil health is not a destination, but it's a journey that's obtained by implementing a system of management practices. It's a constant building process and implementing the conservation, cropping, and grazing systems that will improve the soil health. So it's not a one-time goal, it's not a destination, it's a continued journey that we have to follow the management practices on a regular basis to keep the soils healthy. So we will talk about those principles one by one and see how we can follow those practices under each of these principles and leads to healthy soils. So the first one is the minimize the disturbance. And the primary and the most destructive is the physical disturbance, such as tillage, excessive tillage. It results in bare or the compacted soils, and which is destructive and disruptive to the soil microbes, and also creates a hostile environment for them to live. The another factor is the chemical, which can be the over application or the misapplication of the farm inputs, including the fertilizers or the pesticides, and they disrupt the symbiotic relationship between microbes, plant roots. The biological causes can be there, such as the overgrazing, fallow systems, keeping the soils fallow for an extensive period of the time, or just repeating the same crop over and over time on the same piece of land, as these leads to the reduction in the root mass, also increases the runoff losses. And also these factors will lead to reduction in the organic matter, thus leading to reduce the aggregation, erosion increases, and reduces the habitat for the soil organisms. So we have to follow practices to reduce the disturbance and improve the soil health. The practices that we can follow to minimize the disturbance, as you can see, the no tillage or the reduced tillage is the top one. It's a way of growing the crops without disturbing the soil through the tillage or reducing the tillage practices, so that we can keep some of the residues on the top and reduce the organic matter decomposition, which mostly happens with increasing the tillage on the piece of the land. It also helps not only improving the organic matter in the soil, it also improves the water holding capacity and reduces the erosion, and also decreasing the compaction. If we are not moving the heavy equipments on the land, it helps to reduce the compaction. The another practice to reduce the disturbance is managing the nutrients application. So apply the nutrients to meet the crop needs, while always also reducing the impact on the environment and the soil. Because overuse of the nutrients or the pesticides, they will disrupt the soil ecosystem. So supply only those nutrients that are not provided by the soil system or the amounts that are needed by the crop. The third practice that we can follow is the pest management. So managing the pest by following an ecological approach. It can be integrated pest management approach. That way we are following, promoting the growth of healthy plants with strong defense while also increasing the stress on the pest and improving the habitat for the beneficial organisms. Following the integrated management practices, it also has to reduce the chemical disturbance associated with the over or misuse of pesticides, and also encourages the greater diversity of the soil organisms. The prescribed grazing is another practice that can help to reduce the disturbance. And the manure application with this improves the activity and diversity of the soil. It also has to leave the residue on the soil surface for a part of the period while we are not grazing the animals on top of the soil. So that was one of the principles. So the next principle that we'll discuss is how we can maximize the soil cover, as you can see in this image on the extreme right. So the soil cover can be maximized by integration of cover crop, which is any type of the plant that covers the soil. It reduces the brown gaps during the fallow period, especially during the summer or the winter when there is nothing growing on land. The another practice that can help to maximize the cover is mulching. This can be done either by applying the plant residues or other suitable materials to the soil surface to compensate for the loss of residue due to excessive tillage. It also helps to reduce the erosion caused by wind or the rain, and will moderate the soil temperature as the ground is covered. At the same time, leads to reduction in the weed pressure and improves the organic matter and conserves the soil moisture, since the ground would be covered with the residues or other material. The another practice that can be followed under this principle is the residue or the tillage management. So means leaving the higher levels of residue on the soil surface. That means we are not exposing the ground to the forces, disruptive forces, but we have something on the ground throughout the year. That way we are not eroding our soil. The another thing that we can practice under this is the biomass planting. It means growing a diverse number of crops in a plant sequence in order to increase the organic matter and biodiversity in the soil. So the main goal is to provide the year-round roots, keep the soil covered 365 days a year. Provide the diversity above and below ground. It provide the maximum benefits, enhancing the nutrient cycling, reducing the weed pressure, including the insects and diseases, adds diversity so soil microbes can thrive. So these are the images that I planted some of the crops here. Not this one, but this too, the pearl millet that was planted in the summer at the Fallon Experiment Station. It really came out to be wonderful as a cover crop, or it can be used for the grazing. And then another is a forage soybeans that was planted there as well. So these crops, they played well under our environment too. So going on the cover crop, I didn't dictate much in the previous slide, since I know I have a couple more slides on the same. And this is one of the favorable slide that I want to bring attention is it is the cover crops are like a Swiss Army knife because of their dynamic utility on the farm. By planting and managing the cover crops, farmers or producers, they can see multiple benefits to their land, which includes these are the benefits: improved soil compaction, decreased erosion, decrease the compaction, improve the soil health, increase organic matter, reduce the erosion by wind or water, improve the infiltration of the water, reduce the weed pressure, enhance the presence of the pollinators or the beneficial insects, also and improves the nutrient cycling. And the inclusion of the cover crops, for instance, with the legumes, they also help with the providing the additional nitrogen, which can be taken up by the next crop. The The important benefit is the economic returns, as it helps with the saving the money associated with the inputs, or if we save the money associated with the different inputs, for instance, reducing the pesticide cost, reducing the fertilization. If we have the legumes in our rotation, it will help to save the money and maximize economic returns. Moreover, it's important to learn that uh, it also helps with increasing the crop yields if we increase the organic matter by keeping the soil covered for 365 days a year. This is the another crop that I was involved with, the winter cover crop. I know one of our colleague here, he also planted the same crop at the UNR, and the winter camelina that came out to be the excellent cover crop. Although we had some issues with the weed though, but the seeds from this camelina, they can be pressed for oil, which can be used for the human consumption, animal feed, and using the bio-based fuels. It's this is all camelina, winter camelina, and then on the both sides of the field, you can see the weed growth. This is all weeds, and you can clearly see how the inclusion of the cover crop into the on the piece of the land helps to reduce the weed pressure. And it is the camelina, and it belongs to the brassica family and produce the glucosinolates, which also help to reduce the weed pressure. So it's not that uh, I am telling that this is a valuable crop, but it's all about how cover crops inclusion can help with reducing the weed pressure on the same piece of land. So these are some of the examples that based upon the planting time that can, some of the examples of the crops based upon their planting type that can be included in the crop rotation. The summer annuals are one that are planted either in the spring or the summer, and they are grown until the end of the season. And these are the options that can be pursued under these categories. But if we are looking for some winter annuals that can be seeded in the fall, about 4 weeks prior to the fall frost. So some of these crop will survive the winter, but some they will die over the winter. So it depends upon the choice that we will be making. We will be making to have ground cover throughout the winter, or just want over the winters and nothing growing in the spring. But if you are interested to learn more, it's always good to use the seed mix and find out which works best for your needs. But these are just some examples that we can go with. This is another soybeans that I planted at the experiment station, and it helps with the fixing the nitrogen in the soil. So, and I also harvested the seed out of it. So it's good to see that it can produce seed under our environment as well. The clovers are the good choice in the spring and the fall. In the fall, they can survive. The crimson clover is another example. The Austrian peas, they also help with the fixing the nitrogen. So it depends what our goals are and what we want on the piece of the land that I can dictate in the next slide. So there is no right way to do this, no right way to find out which crop will work for me, which not. We have to consider the several factors to find out what our needs are. So we have to find out what is the time of the planting. If we are looking for the fall, spring, or summer, which time we are looking to plant or cover the piece of the land or the landscape. And then what are the goals? If we are looking to reduce the compaction, then the radish can be, the brassicas, radish can be a good one. Erosion, if we are looking for the nitrogen fixation, then weed control, nitrogen fixation, the legumes would be the good one to consider in this. Or if we are just looking for the pollinators or reducing the weed pressure. The other factor to consider by choosing the cover crop or any crop on the piece of the land is what is the planting method. Are we going to drill the seed, or are we going to broadcast? And also good to see how the cover crop is establishing. It all depends upon seed type, how we are planting, what time of the year, and how the conditions of the soil is. Before we go into these factors, it's very important to know the termination method, whether we are going to terminate by chemical or we are doing mowing, tilling, roller crimping, grazing, or winter kill, because that will dictate other factors as well. Important to consider the cash crops, what the cash crops are in your rotation. It's always good idea to add the diversity, as I mentioned, the above and the below ground. So it's good to have the grasses and the broadleaves. That also helps with the weed pressure. Finally, the seed cost, how the seed, what's the cost associated with the purchase of the seed, and also how available it is. How can we afford not to use the cover crops or not to use the cover crops? So the economics is the driving force before making these choices. So these are some of the factors that I just want to bring attention that we have to consider before digging further into the cover crop establishment and making the decisions upon that. So going back to the principles again, I know I took longer on the cover crop side because there is recent interest among among the producers on that section. So the third principle is how we can maximize the living roots. Since the living roots, they provide the easiest source of food for soil microbes. Growing long season crops or cover crops, following a short season crop, they helps to feed the foundation species of the soil food web, which is the microbes. If we have the longer crop seasons on the piece of land, they help to meet the food requirement of those microbes during the growing season or the extended period of the times. It's always good idea to avoid the fallow periods and have something growing on your piece of land to make your soils, leading your soils towards healthiness. Perennial crops are a good ones, like we have a lot of alfalfa around here. It's a good one to have in the rotation and keeps thriving forces under the ground moving. Crop rotations, it's good to have diverse root architecture or the exudates, because the main theme is to feed the microbes, living organisms under the ground. So if we have the crop rotations, it will meet the different root architecture, and exudates will help to feed the soil food web as much as possible. The another benefits that we can see from this, the nutrient cycling. This is the image that dictates about this. For instance, if we have in the late summer, the radish growing there, the nutrients are taken up from the piece of the land. During the spring thaw, it will start releasing, and again in the late spring when we have the new crop, it will start the nutrients will be taken up by the crop. So it's good to have the crops growing throughout the season. That way we keep our driving forces working and makes our soil towards the healthiness. At the same time, like other three principles, it improves the aggregation, erosion, reduce the erosion, and also breaks the pest cycle, and thus reducing the use of the pesticides to keep under control. The last and the fourth principle is the maximize the biodiversity, which involves both the above and the below ground. And in order to achieve a high level of diversity, always plant the diverse crops. As we know, the biodiversity is ultimately the key to the success of any system. The lack of diversity, this severely limits the potential of any cropping system and increase the pest pressure. So growing multi-species crops, covers, or crops in a sequence include the grasses, legumes, small grains, or their mixtures. It will help to increase the diversity, not only above, but also below ground. And if we add the grazing animals to the cropping system, it's another mean of increasing the diversity into the system. The addition of the livestock also helps with the nutrient cycling and also adds the organic matter to the soil. Some of the practices that increase the microbial diversity underground is, in addition to this, is minimize the disturbance, which involves tillage or follow the no tillage or reduced tillage practices. Enhance the soil carbon in the soil, include the multi-species cover crops or mixed production systems. follow the proper nutrition guidelines, never overuse pesticides or fertilizers. However, the other practices that reduce the microbial diversity is excessive tillage, improper tillage, excessive addition of inputs, following the same crop on the piece of the land, and synthetic chemicals. So we have to consider those factors so that we can maximize the diversity, not only above, but also the below ground. That's a driving force towards the healthiness of the soil. So this is the another test that I want to bring to your attention that can be done anytime, and we don't require any special kits or infrastructure on inputs to do this analysis method. This is called the soil undies test. It's provide an opportunity to find out which field contains the greatest amount of microbial activity, which is the driving force, as I mentioned previously, and which sections of the field they still need improvements to make. So it can be used using the garments, such as a cotton garment piece, and you just need to lay down under the soil and leave it and see over time how the microbes are going to chew this garments. And this is USDA, NRCS, and other groups have encouraged the practices so farmers can get a real feel for microbial activity in the fields. On the right, you can see these garments were added into the fields, were laid down into the field, the 4 different fields. The first one, you can see most of the garment is taken up by the microbial activity, by the soil microbes, because this field was under 5 years of no tillage and 3 years of the cover crops. So that maximized the microbial activity, and you can see how much it is chewed. The fourth one with no activity, as there is nothing chewed by the microbe, it was under the conventional tillage. So if we are tilling the soils, we are reducing the microbial activity, and we can see there is nothing change in the garment that we added into the field. These two, they do have the minimum tillage, and they do have the cover crops for some time period. But clearly the first one and the fourth one can clearly demonstrate how much the microbial is when we have the no tillage cover crops, when we have the conventional tillage. So make sure that you put a flag where you put your cloth or garment into the soil. Otherwise, you will end up digging up entire the field and find out where the cloth is. So it's very important to put a flag, find out where you laid out that piece of the land to see the change over time. With this, I will come to the conclusions and make sure that you know what is soil and what is dirt. Dirt is a dead material, and the soil is a living. So soil is never equal to be a dirt. It's important to keep your soils healthy and productive. Always remember the 4 principles of the soil health and try to practice those principles. Minimize the disturbance, maximize the living roots above and below ground. That's a key to sustain the microbial activity community that supports the plant growth, and maximize the soil cover, keeping the roots throughout year. And diversity is the key to the soil health, include above and below by using the different crops, and also including the livestock into the system. Remember this quote, I like it: do the best you can until you know better, and then when you know better, do better, by Maya Angelou. So with this, I will stop